We are following and looking at what the junta is doing and what they are saying at the moment. We would like for humanity to follow on Sankara's footsteps, and if the junta decides to, they will be honorable, but if they refuse to follow him, they will end up in history's waste bin.
What if the death of one of Africa's most beloved leaders wasn't just a tragedy, but the result of a global conspiracy? Could the forces that plotted Thomas Sankara's assassination still be lurking in the shadows of African politics today? In 1983, a young, ambitious military officer named Thomas Sankara became president of Burkina Faso. Charismatic, determined, and unwavering in his vision, Sankara immediately set about transforming his country. His goals were revolutionary. He aimed to rid Burkina Faso of foreign dependence, fight corruption, and bring about true self-sufficiency. Sankara's ideals would see him take on powerful foes, both at home and abroad, with a fierce commitment to his people. But what happens when a leader dares to challenge the entrenched power structures of both his nation and the world? What happens when a leader's vision threatens the interests of powerful foreign nations? As the revolution unfolded, Sankara's ideals began to clash with the realities of global power. His policies were seen as radical, his anti-imperialist stance too much for some to tolerate. And just 4 years into his presidency, on October 15, 1987, Sankara was assassinated in a coup led by his former ally, Blaise Compaoré. The world mourned, but a question lingered. Was this simply a betrayal from within, or was there a deeper, more sinister hand at play? And is it possible that Burkina Faso's leader, Traoré, still be under the same threat? Let's find out. Thomas Sankara was no ordinary leader. Born in 1949 in a small village in Upper Volta, which would later become Burkina Faso, Sankara's journey to power was as unorthodox as the policies he would later champion. He was a revolutionary, not just in the sense of challenging the political status quo, but in the way he sought to fundamentally reshape the nation's identity and relationship with the world. In the early years of his career, Sankara seemed to blend the best of both worlds, intellect and charisma. He studied in the capital, Ouagadougou, and later attended military training in France. This experience would shape his understanding of both African and Western ideologies, and it sparked within him a deep-seated frustration with the conditions of his own country and, by extension, the entire African continent. Sankara's time in the French military would also serve as a sobering reality check, as he saw firsthand the imperialist attitudes of Western nations toward Africa. Sankara wasn't just any soldier. He believed in the power of the people, in the radical notion that true freedom for African nations could only be achieved by breaking free from the remnants of colonialism and the suffocating grip of foreign intervention. This ideology, still fresh in the winds of post-independence Africa, was rooted in the African liberation movements of the 1960s. But Sankara brought a new level of vigor and urgency to it. He didn't just want independence on paper, he wanted it in action. His political ascension was swift. By 1983, Sankara was appointed as the Prime Minister of Upper Volta. At just 33 years old, his appointment was seen as a move to bring youthful energy to a country plagued by poverty, corruption, and foreign debt. However, the true nature of his revolutionary agenda soon became apparent. Sankara saw an opportunity not just to lead, but to reshape his nation's future, one free from the exploitation of foreign powers and the entrenched elite that had long controlled the nation's wealth. Sankara's coup against the corrupt government of then-President Jean-Baptiste Ouedraogo was calculated, but it was also a statement. It wasn't about seizing power for the sake of power. It was about seizing control of Burkina Faso's future. In August of 1983, he took the reins of the country in a bloodless coup, and just days later, he was named president. With that, the world saw the emergence of a new kind of leadership in Africa, one that rejected the traditional reliance on foreign aid, corporate exploitation, and Western-aligned governance. His first steps as president were nothing short of revolutionary. Sankara began by addressing the country's most pressing issues: poverty, illiteracy, and the overwhelming influence of foreign powers in the nation's affairs. he instituted a series of national reforms aimed at lifting Burkina Faso from the depths of economic dependence, embracing the idea of self-sufficiency as the foundation of the country's development. One of his most ambitious moves was the nationalization of land and resources, particularly the mineral wealth that had been monopolized by foreign companies. Sankara recognized that true independence for Burkina Faso would not come by simply breaking political ties with colonial powers, but by regaining control over the country's natural resources. This policy would prove to be one of his most radical and also one of the most dangerous in the eyes of Western powers who had long been vested in the resources of the African continent. His reforms weren't just about economic control, they were also about social justice. Sankara launched an ambitious literacy campaign, aiming to eradicate illiteracy in the country and improve access to education for all citizens, particularly women. This was revolutionary in a society where traditional gender roles were deeply entrenched and women's rights were often overlooked. Sankara famously said, "The revolution is not a government program. It is a social program. A revolution cannot exist without a transformation of consciousness." His policies sought to instill this new consciousness within the people, one that recognized their agency and potential. Sankara also initiated a nationwide vaccination campaign to tackle diseases such as polio, which had long crippled the population. He understood that a healthy population was the foundation for any revolution, and he prioritized public health as a means to build the nation's strength. Sankara's government even made bold moves to address the country's energy needs, including investing in renewable energy projects and seeking technological innovations that would reduce Burkina Faso's dependence on foreign oil imports. His stance on foreign aid was perhaps the most controversial of all. Sankara rejected the idea that Burkina Faso, and by extension Africa, needed to rely on Western aid to survive. He famously said, "He who feeds you, controls you." Sankara believed that foreign aid perpetuated Africa's dependence on its former colonizers and other Western powers. Instead, he advocated for a system of local economic development, believing that Burkina Faso's true power would come from its people, not from foreign charity. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. Sankara's anti-imperialist rhetoric made him both a hero and a target. To the people of Burkina Faso, he was a leader who finally understood their struggles, a man who wasn't just another figurehead for the status quo. But to Western powers and the elites who had long profited from Africa's resources, Sankara's vision was a dangerous threat to the existing order. As the months passed and Sankara's radical policies gained traction, it became evident that his revolution wasn't just shaking the foundations of Burkina Faso, it was challenging the broader framework of global power. And for those who had the most to lose, this was no longer a mere political movement. It was a direct threat to their control over the African continent. Sankara had made enemies, not just at home, but abroad. The seeds of betrayal had already been sown. October 15, 1987, the day Burkina Faso was irrevocably changed. On this fateful day, Thomas Sankara, the man who had led his country toward independence and self-sufficiency, was assassinated during a coup that would shake not just Burkina Faso, but all of Africa. Sankara's death was swift, brutal, and shrouded in mystery. His former comrade Blaise Compaoré led the coup against him, seizing power with the help of a small group of conspirators. But the question remains, was this simply a betrayal by a close ally, or was there a more insidious force at play? One that spanned beyond the borders of Burkina Faso? As the coup unfolded, the people of Burkina Faso watched in horror as their leader was gunned down. Sankara had been a revolutionary icon, a man who had inspired not just his people, but also many others across Africa. His policies, while radical, were seen as a necessary step toward breaking free from the colonial past. He had nationalized key industries, redistributed land, and promoted gender equality, all of which made him beloved by the masses. But his stance on foreign aid, his anti-imperialist rhetoric, and his push for African self-sufficiency were seen as threats by those whose interests lay in the status quo. In the immediate aftermath of Sankara's death, the world was left to grapple with the magnitude of the tragedy. Was it simply the result of internal political dynamics? Or was there a hidden hand, perhaps even foreign powers, behind the scenes, pulling the strings to ensure that Sankara's bold vision for Burkina Faso was destroyed? The answer to this question would take years to surface, but one thing was clear. The forces that benefited from Sankara's death were not limited to the local elites within Burkina Faso. Foreign governments, particularly those in the West, had reasons to fear Sankara's policies. Sankara's unwavering commitment to anti-imperialism, his rejection of foreign aid, and his vision of a self-sufficient Africa were dangerous ideas in the eyes of many powerful Western nations. Blaise Compaoré, the man who would replace Sankara, was no stranger to the West. Compaoré's rise to power was, in part, the result of Western support for his coup. While Compaoré was officially declared the new leader of Burkina Faso after the coup, it was clear that his government would be far more accommodating to the interests of Western powers. He quickly reversed many of Sankara's policies, re-establishing ties with the former colonial power, France, and realigning Burkina Faso with the broader Western sphere of influence. This shift in allegiance was a crucial turning point. Sankara's death served the interests of those who were uncomfortable with his vision of an independent, self-sufficient Africa. But who were these powerful players, and what did they stand to gain from the removal of Sankara? Western nations, particularly France, had long held economic and political sway over many African countries. This was especially true in former French colonies, where French companies controlled vast amounts of land and resources. Sankara's economic reforms, which included nationalizing these industries, were seen as a direct challenge to French economic interests in the region. Additionally, Sankara's rejection of foreign aid was an affront to the paternalistic model of development that Western countries had long imposed on Africa. For many in the West, Sankara's policies were not just radical. They were a direct threat to the economic order that had kept them in control for decades. In the years following the coup, several reports surfaced suggesting that France had been involved in supporting Compaoré's takeover. While the French government denied any direct involvement, the evidence of their tacit support was undeniable. France's historical influence over Burkina Faso and other African nations made it highly unlikely that the country would stand idly by, while one of its former colonies was being restructured into a self-reliant, anti-imperialist state. The idea of foreign interference in African politics was not new. Throughout the 20th century, many African leaders who challenged the status quo, whether it be through economic independence or anti-colonial rhetoric, found themselves in the crosshairs of Western powers. Sankara's assassination was part of this broader pattern, where leaders who threatened Western economic interests were often silenced. But Sankara's murder was not just the work of foreign powers. It also involved internal political dynamics. Compaoré, who had been one of Sankara's closest allies, was not just acting on his own. His actions were guided by a network of military officers, political elites, and business leaders who had grown uncomfortable with the pace and scope of Sankara's reforms. Many of these elites had benefited from the old system, which allowed them to maintain control over the country's resources. Sankara's radical policies threatened their grip on power, and for them, the removal of Sankara was a necessary step to preserve their wealth and influence. The coup that led to Sankara's assassination, while quick and efficient, was not without its consequences. Burkina Faso, once on the brink of revolution, was thrust back into a period of political stagnation and economic dependency. Compaoré's reign would last for 27 years, but his tenure was marked by corruption, human rights abuses, and the re-establishment of ties with Western powers. While the country's elites were able to secure their positions, the ordinary people of Burkina Faso paid the price. The dreams of Sankara and the hope for a truly independent and self-sufficient Africa were dashed. As the years passed and Compaoré's government grew more entrenched, the legacy of Thomas Sankara became increasingly relevant. Sankara's assassination and the subsequent return to the status quo were not just a tragedy for Burkina Faso. They were a symbol of the ongoing struggle for African sovereignty. Sankara's death illuminated the lengths to which both local elites and foreign powers would go to preserve their control over Africa's resources and political systems. But Sankara's ideas didn't die with him. His policies and his vision continue to resonate with those who believe that Africa's future lies in its own hands. His assassination may have silenced his voice, but his legacy lives on. And as the trial of those responsible for his death continues to unfold, the questions surrounding his assassination remain as relevant as ever. In the aftermath of Thomas Sankara's assassination, many questions remained unanswered. The official version of events painted a clear picture: a coup led by Blaise Compaoré, a trusted ally turned betrayer, fueled by internal political strife. But for some, the truth was more complicated. For decades, Sankara's legacy simmered beneath the surface of Burkina Faso's political landscape, with whispers of a broader conspiracy, one that implicated powerful foreign actors who feared Sankara's radical vision for Africa. Fast forward to the present day, and Captain Ibrahim Traoré, a young and increasingly influential military figure in Burkina Faso, has dared to bring this buried truth into the light. Traoré, who rose to prominence in the wake of the 2022 military coup in Burkina Faso, has found himself embroiled in the ongoing quest for justice for Sankara. His statements have reignited the debate over Western involvement in Sankara's assassination, claiming that foreign powers played a role in silencing a leader who dared to defy the imperialist world order. Traoré's revelation is more than just an admission of the past. It's a clarion call for Africa to confront its colonial history and its present entanglement with foreign powers. Sankara's policies of self-reliance and anti-imperialism, which were deeply rooted in his vision of a liberated Africa, were not just an inconvenience to the elites at home, but a direct threat to the established global order. This revelation by Traoré challenges us to reconsider the role that foreign intervention played in Africa's internal struggles, and whether the cycle of manipulation and control is still ongoing today. Captain Ibrahim Traoré's rise to power has been marked by bold statements and a direct challenge to the powers that shaped the political destiny of his country. In the aftermath of the 2022 military coup, in which Traoré played a significant role, he became a voice for those who felt the weight of Western domination was still too heavy. His tenure marked a shift in Burkina Faso's foreign policy, with a clear pivot away from traditional Western alliances and a closer alignment with African and global partners who opposed foreign interference. In his speeches and interviews, Traoré has openly suggested that the Western powers, particularly France, were deeply involved in the orchestration of Sankara's assassination. His words echo the suspicions that have swirled for decades, that France, which had long held significant influence over its former colonies in West Africa, saw Sankara's policies as a direct challenge to its economic interests in the region. Sankara's radical anti-imperialist stance, coupled with his push for African self-sufficiency, was simply too dangerous for France to ignore. Traoré's claims highlight the long-standing pattern of interference in African nations by former colonial powers. He argues that France, along with other Western countries, was deeply threatened by Sankara's refusal to align with their geopolitical strategies, especially as Africa's resources became increasingly vital to global economic stability. But Traoré doesn't just focus on the foreign powers involved in Sankara's assassination. He also highlights the complicity of local elites who benefited from the status quo. The betrayal by Compaoré, which initially seemed like a personal vendetta, is now being seen through a broader lens. Traoré's perspective is that Compaoré's actions were not entirely his own. Rather, they were the result of external pressures, both from Western powers and from domestic elites who had their interests at stake. It's important to recognize that Compaoré wasn't merely a puppet of foreign interests. He was a member of Burkina Faso's political and military elite, and his ambitions played a critical role in the events leading up to Sankara's assassination. Yet, as Traoré suggests, the Western world's covert support for Compaoré's coup ensured that the old power structures would be restored, structures that benefited from continued collaboration with foreign companies and governments. This revelation changes the narrative from one of personal betrayal to a much more complex picture, one that involves a convergence of both local and international forces, all working in tandem to quash a vision for a sovereign, self-reliant Africa. Traoré's insights suggest that the forces behind Sankara's death were not confined to the political elites within Burkina Faso, but included powerful foreign entities who viewed Sankara as a serious threat to their control over Africa's resources and political direction. For many in Burkina Faso and across the African continent, Traoré's statements are a reminder of the unfinished revolution that Sankara began. Sankara's vision for an independent Africa, one that didn't rely on foreign aid, one that controlled its resources and future, was extinguished too soon. The truth, as Traoré suggests, is that Sankara was killed not just for being a political radical, but for being a symbol of African empowerment at a time when the West was desperately trying to maintain its economic and political dominance in Africa. While Traoré's comments are still met with some skepticism, they strike a chord with those who believe that Sankara's death was part of a larger pattern of Western interventionism in Africa. The idea that Sankara's assassination was not just the result of internal power struggles, but a calculated move by foreign powers, adds a layer of complexity to the history of African political instability. Sankara's death was not just the loss of a man, but the loss of a movement that still resonates today, as Africa continues to grapple with its place in a global order that is still shaped by the remnants of colonialism. Traoré's call for justice is not just about punishing those directly responsible for Sankara's death. It is about confronting the deeper issues of exploitation and control that continue to plague the continent. As the trial for those responsible for Sankara's death moves forward, Traoré's words have added a new dimension to the pursuit of justice. The trial is no longer just about uncovering the identities of the killers. It's about uncovering the global forces that have shaped African history and the continuing struggle for true independence. Traoré's bold revelations are a challenge to the established narrative, one that seeks to absolve foreign powers of their involvement in Africa's political and economic struggles. His words remind us that Africa's fight for sovereignty is far from over. It is a fight against external forces that seek to control Africa's resources, its politics, and ultimately its future. Do you think whoever was behind Sankara's murder wants the same for Traoré? Is Traoré under threat? Let us know in the comments section. Will history repeat itself? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.